Okay, so it's just a little past 4 o'clock Atlantic time. I'm in Fredericton, so we're going to get started. I just want to welcome everybody to our College Sports Communicators webinar. Today, we're going to explore some of the fundamentals of hosting, of play-by-play broadcasting, and color commentary, uh, with what we hope are some practical tips and elements that you can take back to what it is you're doing on your campus, maybe even later today, but certainly in the immediate future. For those of you who don't know me, by way of quick introduction, my name is Andy Campbell. I'm the communications manager for the UNB Reds at the University of New Brunswick in Fredericton. Prior to coming here, I spent about 25 years in broadcasting, including stints in private radio, CBC Sports, both radio and television, CTV Atlantic News for about 15 years here in Fredericton, and I spent a couple of seasons calling play-by-play in the American Hockey League with the Calgary Flames old farm team, the St. John Flames, just down the road here in New Brunswick. We're very fortunate to have with us today a couple of seasoned broadcasters who combined really have decades of experience broadcasting professional and university sports, as well as major international sporting competitions. In this webinar, I need to make sure that you know that the Canadian College Sports Communicators Cabinet has put it together, organized it, and is facilitating it. So let me introduce our guests. We'll get the elephant out of the room, out of the way right away. Jamie Campbell is my brother. He is the celebrated host of Blue Jays Central on Rogers Sportsnet. His career in sports broadcasting began behind the scenes with CBC Sports on a program that some might be too young to remember. It was called Sports Weekend. His on-camera career began at CBC Edmonton and later moved on to Ottawa's CJOH. He's been at Sportsnet since day one at Sportsnet, and along with hosting the Jays pre- and post-game shows, he's called play-by-play for the Blue Jays. And next Saturday will mark the 16th anniversary of his call of the first Canadian Olympic gold medal on Canadian soil, or I guess on snow in this case. That came when Alexander Bilodeau claimed the gold medal in the men's mogul at the 2010 Vancouver Olympics. So we welcome Jamie.
Nice to see you, older brother, and thank you for having me.
Yes, Doug McLean is our other guest today. He is the president and owner of McLean Sport and Strategy, an Edmonton-based sports marketing firm. He's the play-by-play voice of the Edmonton Stingers of the Canadian Elite Basketball League, and he also serves as color commentator on basketball and football broadcasts, webcasts, live streams at the University of Alberta. He has broadcast Canada West football and CFL action, as well as international events. FISU, I believe, Doug, and the World University Games and FIBA Olympic qualifying and 3-on-3 events. So we'll welcome Doug McLean to our broadcast.
Thanks, Andy. Good to be here.
Thank you. Let's just start by kind of giving an idea as to, I'll start with Jamie, and just, you're primarily a baseball broadcaster right now. What does a baseball broadcaster do in the depths of January and February?
Well, after the team that this baseball broadcaster covers goes to the seventh game of the World Series, you end up fielding phone calls from a lot of people around the country. Everybody seems to have a podcast, so many of them reach out to see if I can take part to discuss what we saw. Quite frankly, for 3 weeks after the World Series ended, I had to find myself acting as a therapist for people as I walked down the street who needed a hug. In some cases, they were crying. So that tells you the impact that that team had on so many people, not just here in Toronto, but across the country. And I have the benefit of being able to travel around Canada in the off seasons to speak to people, as I will be beginning tomorrow. I'm heading to Weyburn and Swift Current, Saskatchewan with Blue Jays catcher Tyler Heineman. While we're there, we're going to be visiting with many people in the community and raising funds for baseball teams in their communities too, which is an absolute benefit of the job. So the summers are exceedingly busy, and the winters are as busy as I'd like them to be.
Doug, you're in a bit of a different position. You're moving into the home stretch of what is the Canada West basketball season. Let me ask you, being in those potential playoff races in the end of regular seasons, what are you doing right now to kind of keep things relevant, keep things new, keep things interesting to people who are tuning in?
Yeah, I think it's at least this season in Canada West, it's actually been pretty easy because there's been some really interesting matchups both on the women's side and on the men's side. So we've been lucky in the sense that I think the games themselves and the competition level across Canada West has really helped tell those stories pretty effectively. I think now, like you said, Andy, we're heading into the last weekend of the season. Again, you're setting up playoff matchups, so it's easy to have some new content to talk about because there are a lot of interesting races, both on the men's side and the women's side. So I think in that regard, yeah, you're kind of past a little bit of the individual stories, perhaps of the players that you might be telling earlier in the year, especially new players that are coming in, and you're moving more into how those players are adapting, and then tying that into the playoff story and where we're heading beyond this weekend.
Okay, we've got some of the introductory stuff out of the way, so let's kind of jump into the focus of this webinar is for our young people on campuses across the country who are, telling the stories of teams at their university, their college. Not all of those tend to be students. I know here at the University of New Brunswick, we employ some professional people from the community that have a history of being with the team. We try when we can to have students doing it, but that's not always the case. So whether you're a student or whether you're somebody who has a 9 to 5 job elsewhere and spends Friday and Saturday nights in a media box calling basketball or volleyball or hockey, what have you, we hope to help you have an advantage the next time you sit down and prepare to do something like that. Uh, let's start where I think every broadcaster might start, and that would be in the prep work. Um, Doug, how much time do you put into preparation, and what does that preparation for a basketball game look like?
Yeah, I mean, you just brought that up, Andy. I mean, for me, for the most part, doing my broadcasting stuff, it has been my second career. So I've had another career. I do that during the day and then, be able to do the prep work at night. Now that I'm in a consulting company, it's a little easier. I can filter that in during the days. So it makes it a little simpler. Yeah, I mean, it depends on the week. Like this week, I'm probably, because there's so much stuff on the playoff side, I'm probably I'll do 10 to 12 hours over a few days leading up into our games on Friday and on Saturday. Earlier in the year, it might be a little bit less, sort of depending on where we're at. And again, you're trying to find, I mean, it's easy enough. I mean, we don't have the benefit necessary. We have good numbers, good info that comes at us. I mean, Jamie on the baseball side, it's a little different in terms of the stories and stuff that surround Major League Baseball. So for us, it's about taking some of the numbers and info that we're getting and trying to dive a little bit deeper into that. What are we seeing? What are the trends we're seeing? How are things changing for a team over the course of one week to another? How are matchups impacting what we're seeing in terms of some of that, the number stuff? And you're trying as well to get a sense of the individuals and some of those matchups too, in terms of especially young players. And Andy, you know this, obviously doing things at UNB. I mean, you're dealing with sometimes 18, 19-year-old athletes who are getting their first time around going through a playoff push. And so you're trying to understand some of that stuff and seeing if, as the season wears on, is it changing how a player or a team is responding or reacting? So the numbers are important, but I think it is about, as best you can, diving a little bit deeper into that. And we're really fortunate, especially on the basketball side, to have, I mean, Martin Timmerman, who does an unbelievable work with the stats that he pulls up and some of the combined information that he has. I mean, it's an absolute gold mine of information that allows me to be able to use that again to dive in a little deeper, not just say so and so shooting 45% from the field, but how have they been doing over the course of the year? Oh, in the last 10 games, they've really picked up. They're shooting the ball really well. So being able to take that information and dive a little bit deeper to have stories that I think tell a better picture than just straight numbers, that's what I try to focus on now. And like I said, it's depending on the week, it's 10 to 12 hours somewhere in there prep leading up to it.
Jamie, you're a professional broadcaster. Do you do your own research, or is something like that done for you, or is it a bit of a combination of both?
I do all my own, and let's not forget that the access to information that I have doing Blue Jays baseball for audiences that might range from on one day 500,000 to a World Series broadcast that generated 11 million viewers. The access to information that I have is abundant and readily available. So that's an advantage to me, and that's an advantage of being on a broadcast team that generates, based on the interest in that baseball team, a very sizable audience. So um, it's not fair to someone who's just beginning their play-by-play career at a high school level, or maybe even a college sense, depending on the size of that college or university. Um, they're dealing with all kinds of challenges that someone like me doesn't have to deal with. And those challenges could be a lack of familiarity with the actual players, which means that that young person needs to go and make sure they invest themselves in meeting the team that they're covering and doing as much research as they can, in essence, through personal conversation, because they're not going to be able to just go on the internet like I can and read 1,000 articles about the 2025 Toronto Blue Jays. So let's be frank about how what I do in the weirdest way is actually easier than what a lot of young people, many of whom might be listening to this, are faced with. So I encourage anyone who's starting out at a grassroots level to embrace it, find the passion. Clearly, you have a passion if you're picking up a microphone and you're calling a sport of any kind. There has to be a passion there. You don't do it because someone's told you you have to. You want to be there. And if you want to be there, as I did when I was very young, I used to take a little handheld microphone and a tape cassette that I bought at Radio Shack to Old Maple Leaf Gardens and sat way up in the risers and called the game with no notes. And that was just raw practice. That's all it was. I still have those tapes. And quite frankly, they're terrible. They're supposed to be terrible. I was just a kid. I was just trying. And now I live in this world where all the research I want to do every day is very easy for me to access. And I have all the passes I need to go down to batting practice and talk to Ernie Clement or Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and find out what they're thinking and implement that in my broadcast. So as far as research goes, I get a little bit of information fed to me from the Blue Jays, specifically Major League Baseball, and a department of young people at Sportsnet who assist in that regard. But for the most part, I'm looking for all my own angles prior to the game. And then once I collect with my analysts, I'm focusing on what it is they want to point out so I can draw the very best of them when it gets time to showtime.
So let's break it down to the basics, whether it be Blue Jays Central or Saturday night's University of New Brunswick volleyball game against the St. Mary's Huskies. What is the essential element of that preparation? I know you do a lot of reading. Doug talked about the fact that he's got some statistical analysis that he can do. Is it sitting at a practice on a Wednesday afternoon, talking to the coach, talking to some of the athletes? If I can't access the 1,000 articles that you have the luxury of accessing, where should I be going to get that information that's going to make my broadcast better?
Doug, do you want to start with that?
Sure, I can start with that. Yeah, I mean, and Jamie touched on some of the stuff already. I think it's as best you can. It's getting some of that access and having conversations with the people that are involved. So if it's athletes, coaches, etc. I mean, the more you can do that and develop a rapport with them, that makes a massive difference. Because you develop that trust, you develop that connection, they'll be more willing to talk and share and converse with you. Sometimes that's not possible. And again, for me earlier in my broadcasting side, because I had a 9 to 5 job, that was really hard to do. So what you then do is you lean, in my mind, as best you can. I mean, Connor Hood's on here. He's a sports info director at the U of A and does an awesome job for us, giving us information, giving us access to coaches, players, et cetera, as we need to. And that's made a big difference. I know when I was doing Canada West football, it helped a lot. We'd have weekly calls leading up to games with the coaches and with some of the players just to get a bit of the flavor of what was going on, even though our broadcast crew was scattered across the country. So yeah, I think it's the more that you can develop that connection with different people that are involved in the games you're about to call. I think that makes a huge difference in terms of the stories that you can then tell, because again, they're going to be more confident and comfortable sharing information back with you.
I want to tell a quick story about how I derive information from people at various levels, and I encourage any young broadcaster, again, if you're passionate, to really think outside the box as to how it is you want to compile not only information, but really good stories that you can tell. And like I said, it's very easy for me to spend every day the Blue Jays are at home down on the field during batting practice, chatting with people and immersing myself in potential stories that may or may not make the broadcast. But years and years ago, I got an opportunity to be the floor interviewer at the 2001 NHL draft. It's the first and only time I ever did such a thing. And the process is someone is selected number 1 overall. The kid goes up, puts on a jersey. I'm sure you've seen it 1,000 times. And then they come off the stage and someone is there to ask a couple of questions very quickly. And it was a bit of an overwhelming assignment for me because trying to learn 100 some odd junior hockey players and learn everything you can possibly learn about them is a very, very difficult thing to do. So my tactic was get down to where this draft was happening 3 days ahead of time. And that draft was happening in the home of the Florida Panthers in Sunrise, Florida, and try my best with this list of who was expected to go in the first round to meet with all the parents of these kids. And I was pretty darn successful in meeting almost everybody's parents. And I'll tell you how it paid off. The first guy in that draft taken was a kid named Ilya Kovalchuk, Russian player, barely spoke any English. Jason Spezza went number 2. I'd known tons about him, and we had a great interview. I forget who number 3 was, but number 4 was this kid by the name of Stephen Weiss. And he was selected by the Florida Panthers. And so the place kind of went crazy. And this was a big deal. They had the 4th overall pick. And I will never forget meeting his mother for breakfast. And I said, you need to tell me something about Stephen that nobody knows. And she says, I will. When he was a little boy playing floor hockey in our basement with his sister, he would never start a game of floor hockey with his sister until I had come down into the basement and sang the two of them the national anthem. And so as Stephen Weiss is coming off the stage with this new Florida Panthers jersey over his shoulders, and he's very nervous, and I'm supposed to somehow put him at ease and get the best of him in some way for about 2 minutes, I mentioned that it's such a shame his mom isn't standing with us to sing the national anthem at this time. And he broke out into this great grin, and he was so at ease. And the interview with an awkward, somewhat nervous kid went exceedingly well at that point. So the basis of the story is you don't necessarily need a computer to prepare for a broadcast if you've got people around you who are involved in the field of play in any way. And parents are an amazing source of information.
You both raise really interesting points there and it makes me kind of move ahead on the agenda that I have, because what we're dealing with, whether it be a live broadcast at the draft or as Doug deals with a live football game or a live basketball game, we're storytellers, but the story is unfolding in front of us. We don't have a script in front of us. How do you deal, and is there a secret to dealing with the unknown element of what we're participating in?
Can I start with that? I would recommend, and Doug should expand on this given that he does both basketball and football, which are different paced games, right? Imagine the challenge of trying to weave a story into a basketball game, or a hockey game, for example, where it's action, 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 time off the clock, face off, action again. There is very little time, and you don't want to get into some long story and suddenly someone scores a goal and you've missed it because you're telling the tale of, I don't know, Stephen Weiss, right, getting his jersey from the Florida Panthers. So you have to recognize the sport, you have to recognize the moments, you have to be aware that you cannot miss the important moment happening in front of you. And baseball is such a beautiful sport to call because there are these long, long moments of inaction. But when the action begins, you have to be ready for it. So when I did Blue Jays baseball play-by-play for 5 years, I had to be very careful about when am I going to dig out this particular story about Adam Lind or Reed Johnson. I have to wait until the perfect moment, but I'm not going to compromise and talk over play to get it in there. You have to be disciplined and know when the right time is to present that kind of thing.
Doug, how do you deal with that? The unknown, really, or the unscripted?
Well, yeah, and I'll just quickly build on what Jamie said. He's right that the pace of games is so different, and you do have to understand that nature of when you jump in, when you don't. And I think the thing too that I've been fortunate is I've worked with so many great people, either doing color for me or working play by play. You just develop a rapport with them, and you start to figure out the pace of them and how you can jump in and throw those stories in. Because Jamie's right, you got to be really careful not to go on a long soliloquy that suddenly you're talking for 3-4 minutes and who knows what's happening down on the ice or the field. But I think the unexpected, I'll give a quick story. So as Andy, you mentioned, I've done a lot of work with FISU, the International University Sports Federation, and I used to do the broadcasts of the opening and closing ceremonies. And so we were doing the opening ceremonies of the games in 2017 in Taipei, Taiwan. And they're doing the athlete parade and everything's going fine. Teams are coming out. Okay, great. Just before Canada's obviously pretty early, just before Canada comes out, I'm forgetting which country it was, fairly small country. And there's only a flag bearer that came out. Okay, well, that's a little small, but interesting. Next, Canada comes out and there's only a flag bearer. There are no athletes. I'm like, what is going on here? Next country comes out, same thing, just an athlete. And I'm scrambling while I'm still doing the broadcast, trying to talk and sort of keep things going because the parade is still happening, even though there's no athletes anymore. I'm madly texting colleagues of mine, trying to figure out what's happening while I'm still trying to sound calm and have everything going on. I'm getting information saying there's a protest. Athletes have been locked into the room. They can't leave because they wouldn't be able to get through to the stadium because of this protest. And so you're just trying to keep calm and go on. And to Jamie's point about stories and having some of that information in your head, that it's not always about stats. It's just having some information that you can throw at key times. And that comes back to the passion piece. It comes back to just, people often ask me, well, how do you remember all this stuff? I said, I don't know. I just enjoy it. So it sticks in my head. So ideas and thoughts are always there. And that was super valuable during that moment for about probably 45 minutes where we had the parade happening with no athletes. And then the athletes were finally let out. So they redid the parade again. So I had to come up with extra and different stories to tell as the athletes were coming out. So you never do know what's going to happen. But I just think that ability to do a couple of things, remain calm in the moment and remember that you're trying to project that back to the audience that are watching, because I wasn't about to start talking about there being a protest. That's a politically sensitive thing to do too. But having that passion piece, I think we keep coming back to, is so valuable in that moment to be able to navigate a tough situation, because you just had enough info that you could drop in at the right times to keep the broadcast moving, despite what was clearly a bit of a challenge with what was happening out on the field.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about preparing for play-by-play. Jamie, I know that you're working a studio show largely now. You do have the 5 seasons of calling play-by-play. But baseball is 9 men. There aren't shift changes. Doug, you deal with football and basketball where there are constant changes. In football, 20 or more athletes on the field at a time, offense and defense. From time to time, I get to still call some UNB hockey here. Is there a way? I'm very old school. I know already next Wednesday, I'm calling a men's hockey game here at UNB when they play Moncton. I will take the Moncton roster and I will literally old school pen and paper write out the Moncton roster 15 or 20 times.
Hmm.
That is how I embed those names and those numbers into my head. How did you prepare names, numbers, positions in your head ahead of a broadcast?
It obviously depends on the sport. The beauty of baseball is there's this scorecard that's presented at every Major League Baseball park. I actually had my own made up blank pages that I would put in this binder well before the season began. And then I would simply write in the lineup of the Blue Jays and whoever the team was they were facing, let's say the New York Yankees, with lots of spaces in case someone was pinch hit for or was a defensive replacement. And then around that scorecard would have lots of space for defensive alignments, the umpiring crew, notes about where we were in the season, notes about the visiting team, and maybe even some historical stuff. The one thing that I learned hard and early on in my first year of doing Blue Jays play-by-play was that you should never try to spend too much time looking down at your notes, at your scorecard. And the lesson I learned was a game involving a player on the Blue Jays by the name of Aaron Hill, who was at third base, less than 2 outs, dancing off the bag at third. There was a left-handed pitcher on the mound. I think it was Andy Pettitte of the Yankees, if I'm not mistaken, who's got a bit of a slow move to the plate. And I was so fixated on telling a story at that time, I put my head down and looked for something. And in the moment that I did that, Aaron Hill stole home and I missed it. I didn't see it. All I did is I looked up and there he was sliding across home plate. I made an assumption about what he had done, but I can tell you honestly, I didn't see it. I was right in my assumption, which saved me, but it was a great lesson learned early on that really, when you think about it, the key to any play-by-play, whether it's basketball, football, hockey, baseball, doesn't matter. Don't take your eyes off the field of play.
Doug, 40 guys on a football field. How do you keep track of them all? Sorry, 20 guys on a football field or thereabouts.
It's tough, and I'm similar to you, Andy. Like I'm typing it out, going back over it, again and again. I've got my lineup all mapped out in terms of with the depth charts that we're receiving from the teams, which, as Connor and I know, are a bit of an adventure week to week with coaches trying to hide who might be in the lineup and who isn't. So you got to be careful with that. But yeah, it is about, I think, back to what we talked about before, just spending time in and around the team, trying to gain, especially with football, because depending on the facility you're in, I mean, when I did a couple of CFL games, you're obviously a lot further away than if you're doing a university game, you're a lot closer. So your ability even to sort of get a sense of the players and how they move, that's the kind of stuff for me that I try to watch is yes, positionally, where's someone typically going to line up? If they're a receiver that's lining up as the inside slot, okay, that's typically where they are. But you can't, kind of similar to what Jamie said, you can't rely on that because teams are going to have different formations. They're going to move guys in and out. There's going to be motion that shifts things. So again, keeping your eyes up, understanding how teams tend to react in certain situations, I think is important. But just trying to get a bit of a sense of either tendencies of the team or even just little quirks about the athlete, how they might run a route, if we're talking football, things like that you can lean on, even if it's tough in the moment as a player turns and there's bodies around to catch a number or to see exactly who the athlete is. So if you have some of that stuff leading in, that can at least help you in the moment. I mean, binoculars make a big difference too. That can help just in terms of trying to see. I mean, there's no question about that. Like you got to give yourself some tricks to be able to catch it. Football's a lot of fun. I find it the most challenging sport to do because of what we're talking about here is the volume of players, but it's a lot of fun to do once you get into it. But there are little tricks like that you can lean on.
Yeah, if I go back to my American Hockey League days, there was a time well into seasons where I wouldn't even look at the back of jerseys. It was the skate or the way
Yeah.
the player skated or the way they taped their stick. I knew intimately who it was just by looking at certain aspects of their dress or their game or how they uh, put themselves out on the ice. Obviously, analysis, color commentary, and play-by-play are two totally different things. Doug, are there cues for you to interject with a play-by-play announcer? And do you wait for a question? Do you wait for a physical cue from somebody? How does that work?
That's a really good question. It's probably a mix of all of that. I think I'm fortunate in doing the U of A games. Mark Majot and I have done games now for close to 10 years. So we have a pretty good sense of each other and how to play off. I think what I learned, I think from when I was doing it, years ago, is you don't always have to say something. It's okay to let the play breathe. And I'm still probably guilty of doing that. I'm not doing that enough, if I'm being honest. That at times, just let Mark describe it, and that's all we need. I don't need to jump into something. But I think, there are moments where it can be, you just jump into something really quick, just that can complement what Mark has said. So that's my aim all the time, is that he and I are in sync in terms of him saying something, what, in terms of describing the play, what can I do to build on that, to add a little bit more color? Obviously, that's where the name comes from, to add a little bit more flavor to what's going on, so people might understand a little bit. Hey, how did that layup happen? What did occur that opened up that player for an easy score? And it might be a quick 5-word thing that I say. It doesn't have to be a long, drawn out process necessarily. But so Mark and I wouldn't say there are a lot of cues. When I do, on the flip side, when I do the play-by-play side and in basketball, and I'm working with Paul Sir, who's long career in basketball here in the Edmonton community, I'll lean on him and ask him some questions just to help to not guide him, but just to, frankly, I'm curious too to hear what he has to say. And so we've developed a bit of a rapport on that front, where I can sort of guide things a bit based on what I'm seeing. And actually my color commentary background helps with that too, because I can think of what I might say if I was a color person and present something that Paul can then take and build and run with. So I think it's very different when he and I do games than when Mark and I do games, but the rapport works well both ways.
In so many instances, as you know, there are situations, depending on the size of the broadcast, depending on where you're coming from, whether it's a high school broadcast or a college broadcast of some kind, where you might be the only person with a microphone. And you try to add a little more than just describing of the play. And that can be a challenge, especially if you never played at that level yourself. So I admire people who can do that creatively. As a solo artist, so to speak, I'm also a bit old school, where personally, as the host of a pregame and postgame show, it is not my job, because I never swung a bat in the major leagues, to offer a strong opinion on why a major league player is not doing their job. I can cite numbers and say that so-and-so is hitting 201 over the last 4 weeks. We know that's not good. But to offer sort of a personal criticism of a major league player is something you will never hear out of my mouth, because that job belongs to the people I sit with who played the game, Joe Siddle or Caleb Joseph or Madison Shipman, or in the old days when I did play-by-play, Pat Tabler or Rance Mullenix. They played. They can say, this guy's not good enough and here's why. I can't say that, and quite frankly, never have.
I don't know that it factors in as the host of a pre and post game show, so maybe this is more for Doug. Um, do you certainly when there are big crowds and there are key moments, and maybe playoff games is about the only place we might find it, do we let the crowd speak sometimes? Do you have opportunities where that happens, and just shut yourselves down and let the crowd take over for a moment?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Andy. I think it is important to again let the game and let the atmosphere breathe a little bit, because if I mean we've had both women's and men's basketball nationals here over the last 5 years, and so there certainly have been moments in those calling those games where that is the right thing to do, just to step back, because the crowd was fantastic and was right into it, and for you're trying to think back to what the viewer wants, and in that moment the viewer doesn't want to hear some guy named Doug yapping away. He'd rather hear the crowd and how engaged they are and how excited they are. That helps tell the story better, frankly, than I probably can. So I think that is a really important thing. And having called some gold medal hockey games at the World University Games, sort of the same thing. That's a big moment. Everyone knows that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not there to again, I didn't play at this level. To what Jamie said a few minutes ago, like I didn't play at that level. So let the crowd carry it a lot more, and they can do probably a better job than I can. And then I can jump back in when the time is right, a few seconds later, and fill in, not the gaps, but sort of carry the story on. But I think the crowd can play a big part in how the whole story is ultimately told.
And of course, those big moments, right? We know that you cannot anticipate them. You can imagine them happening. I don't think anybody imagined George Springer hitting a 3-run home run in the 7th inning of Game 7 in the American League Championship Series, but it happened. And they're the moments that shock you and surprise you, and you need to be ready to address them when they happen, as professionally as possible. And you mentioned the 2010 Winter Olympics, when the anticipation of who was going to be the first gold medal winner from Canada was palpable. And from my standpoint, among the people that I was working with as part of the Olympic Consortium, it was a conversation point for weeks leading up to the games. Who was going to get that first shot at calling a gold medal? And a couple of executives came to me and said, your chance on night one is really good, because the defending moguls champion on the women's side was someone by the name of Jennifer Heil from Spruce Grove, Alberta. And she was, in fact, the defending world champion. So I knew there was an excellent chance that she could be the first Canadian gold medalist. In anticipation of it happening, which I look back on now as a bit of a mistake, I literally wrote down a line on the hotel letterhead that read, if I remember correctly, "You can breathe easier now, Canada. This country finally has a gold medal right here at home." And I slipped it under my notes for the women's event that night, thinking that Jen was going to win that medal. And it turns out that she was in great shape on her final run, but the last skier down was an American named Hannah Carney. And in moguls terms, Hannah beat Jen by like a fingernail in moguls terms. And I realized in that moment that I had prepared for something that didn't happen. And how dare I, right? How dare I try and anticipate the unfolding of an Olympic event? Now, to finish that story, nobody, and I mean nobody, expected Alex Bilodeau to win the gold medal as he did the next night. And I had followed the circuit from start to finish that year, and he was not the best mogul skier on the men's side. I thought if he wins a medal at all, a silver or a bronze, that's a huge accomplishment. So when he did win it, my reaction was way more excitable than I actually wanted it to be, because I kind of pride myself on a steady performance and more of a respectable call. But I knew an entire nation was jumping for joy. And in a way, I did too, because I couldn't believe what I was seeing, that after everybody had come down in the final run, he was number one. And I gave it, after my initial excitement of saying he's done it, this chance to breathe, which I think was a good 10 seconds to allow the crowd in. And the reason that happened is, to be honest, I had my right hand fishing for that line I'd written for Jen Heil, and I found it and I pulled it out and I said it. And I said, "You can breathe easy now, Canada." And that line was actually intended for Jennifer Heil the night before. But fishing for that in my notes allowed you, the viewer, to hear this audience of people going crazy on the mountain and presumably in the living rooms around Canada.
Yeah, 25 years ago this May, I had the great fortune of calling a Calder Cup victory, the American Hockey League Championship for the St. John Flames. They beat the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins, and Game 6 was in St. John in the Flames home rink. There were probably 6,900 people in that arena that night. And as the time wound down in a 1-0 hockey game, um, the feeling in the building was, you could feel it in your feet. You could hear people. And as zero showed on the clock, um, I stopped talking, and the guy that was doing color for me that night was a volunteer. He was a guy who'd been around the team for decades, or the better part of a decade, and he liked to talk. And something inside me just said, we had not talked about it beforehand because we didn't want to think that, well, it could happen in game six. There could be a game seven too. And as I stopped talking, I looked over at him. I saw his mouth start to open, and I literally put my hand up and over his mouth and just held it there for about 10 seconds, let the sound breathe. And I'll throw in another one here too. You can go look for it on YouTube. There was a wonderful moment in the NCAA men's basketball tournament. I think it was 2023. It was a game between Furman, who was a 12 or a 13 seed, and Virginia, who I think was a 3 seed at the time. Kevin Harlan was on the call. It was a really close game in the fourth quarter, and there was a turnover, and Virginia had a 1 point lead. They turned the ball over in the final seconds, and Furman hit a three to take a lead and win the game. And Kevin Harlan literally stood up. It's on YouTube. You can go and look for it. And he really commands the table with his analysts. And he stands up and he just throws his arm across the front of the two analysts on either side of him. And he just quiets everybody for just a moment because the crowd,
Mhm.
like that moment in St. John, like Vancouver 2010 with Alex Bilodeau, that moment was one that everybody could soak in through the crowd, whether you were there or listening on the radio or watching on television.
Mhm.
So, um, yeah, I think of storytellers and I think written. We can all pick up a book. Some of us still pick up a newspaper from time to time. We can all go on our phones. We can go online and read stories, copious amounts of whatever we want to pull together. But is a color analyst, is a play-by-play, is a Blue Jays Central host a storyteller?
I think so. It would be a waste of the platform for someone like me who has the access that I have, if I've got a good tale to tell, to waste that opportunity. Again, in a pre-game packaged live television show, you have to find the right time. Either you do so or you don't, but you try never to wedge something in unnecessarily. Oftentimes, if I know there's a great story, I'll try and organize a sit down interview with somebody to be able to tell it. In fact, opening day is, I think, 5 or 6 weeks away. And I've already imagined an interview that I'd like to do the first weekend of the season with someone who plays for not the Blue Jays, but the Athletics, the team that's actually coming in to play the Blue Jays, because he's got an incredible story to tell. Whether or not that gets fit into what we're doing is to be determined, but I'm certainly going to sell it and sell it fairly hard. So yeah, I've always believed stories are the essence of sports. It's why we're drawn to them in the first place.
Doug?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think there's no question that that what's happening on the field or the ice or the court is the ultimate story, and I think it's about, in my mind, how you're rounding that out and supporting that. So whether it's interviews like Jamie's discussing, or whether it's identifying, I mean, we often see in the university world lots of family histories and family connections, because we've got athletes coming to the same school their parents played at, and their parents were all stars. So you've got lots of interesting angles you can often bring in. Certainly doing professional basketball now in Canada, same thing. You've got really interesting background for athletes that are coming through some of the schools that they played at, or the athletes that they've competed against. So there's always things you can do to round that out. So for me, it's about making sure to let the game breathe as best as possible and be the story, but then what can I do to further elevate that, to bring it up, and to try to support those that are viewing at home to, again, better understand what is going on inside, and not even just from a technical standpoint, but some of the really interesting backgrounds that a lot of these athletes have. And again, in university sport, we're lucky because the student athletes often have some really unique backgrounds and stories and plans for their futures that we can talk about. So we're fortunate that way for sure.
Doug, what do you do? You can spend some time at a Golden Bears shoot around or the Wednesday night practice if you can get away from your 9 to 5 thing. But as teams from University of Saskatchewan or UBC or wherever else in Canada West come in, how do you balance them into whatever broadcast you're doing outside of, gee, I looked on the website, I know so and so is doing this, and I know they're on a 6 game winning streak, that kind of thing, the statistical information.
Yeah, I think it's doing, and again, we may not have the volume of stories coming through that say the Blue Jays have or other professional sports do, but there are lots of good stories that do exist, and digging through those and finding those. And there's lots of good reporting that goes on where I can understand some things, and then you can lean on the sports information directors to either create a connection for you back to that athlete to have a conversation, or to provide you a little more context or a little bit of additional information that you can use. Because, yeah, I think for us, I mean, if I'm doing University of Alberta football or basketball, I mean, yeah, we are the host broadcaster in that sense, but I don't ever want to lose sight of the other teams that are coming in, because their family and friends and fans are watching too. So we want to make sure that we're respectful of that. And so, again, I was doing a bunch of my prep this morning for Lethbridge coming in, and diving into a lot of the stories for the Lethbridge pronghorns, and trying to see again what are some interesting things that I can touch on and dig into a little bit more deeply. And again, we're lucky because we have such great people, like yourself, Andy, or Connor, other sports info directors across the country on the university side that can support, and same on the pro side for doing the Stinger games. So it's the information's there. I think it's about how willing you are to keep diving into it. And the fun thing is, I find, is that it's just, when do I stop myself? Because I get to a story and then I want to go dig deeper and keep going. And okay, hold on a minute. I'm probably going to use 15% of my prep in a game anyway. So I have to find a limit at times, but it can be fun to dive into some of those unique things.
Yeah,
This really illustrates, Andy, sorry to interrupt, the importance of the human connection. We'll go back to that. I know you can access a lot of things by firing up a laptop, but the human connection in broadcasting is so critical. When I traveled with the Blue Jays for 5 years, I would seek out, every time we went to a new city, first day of that 3 game series, moment I get to the ballpark and set my stuff up in the broadcast booth, the first person I went to look for every time was the home play-by-play guy. So if it was Seattle, it was Rick Riz. If it was Kansas City, it was Ryan Lefebvre. If it was Cleveland, it's Matt Underwood. And we established these great friendships, and we relied on each other, so that when they came to Toronto and they'd been on a long road trip through, I don't know, New York and Boston, and just hadn't had any time to figure out what the Blue Jays were up to and what the primary stories were, they'd come to me. I'd offer them a seat in my broadcast booth, and we'd talk for half an hour. And I'd give them everything I could possibly give them that might be relevant to their broadcast, and they'd, in return, exchange it back to me. And that's why anybody who's starting out, never ever underestimate the power of a phone number for a coach, a former player, a current player's parents. It's incredible what information you can derive from talking to people.
We have a pretty sizable audience. I just want to bring Connor Hood into this fold for just a moment. Connor, can we facilitate some questions from people? Like, the three of us have kind of yammered on here for a little bit. I'm just wondering if there's a way to facilitate questions from anybody who might have them. Is that doable?
Yeah, feel free if anyone wants to throw questions into the chat or throw their hand up. I think that'll be easiest for me and Andy to kind of monitor it. I'll start with a question just because it kind of popped into my mind. I think both Doug and Jamie could answer this one. You guys both have a breadth of information when you're doing these broadcasts, but then you might have a grandma watching Lethbridge play basketball and she's never watched basketball before versus someone who watches every single second of Blue Jays baseball.
Mm-hmm.
Make all this information digestible for the viewer. Because for us, we're sports people, we get it, we own, we know it, we live in it. But how do you make it digestible for the casual fan that's just watching?
You would be shocked at how many people, oh no, you wouldn't be shocked. Given what the Blue Jays just accomplished, I've met like loads of people in the last 4 months who never watched baseball prior to September. People who have immigrated to this country, didn't know what baseball was, and somehow around September, they got the sense that something was happening and they started tuning in. So they're watching it for the first time. And in many respects, the people I spoke to that were doing this were connected right until the very end when the World Series came to an end. So I believe as a broadcaster that I can talk about a two-seamer as one who would probably assume that if you've watched enough baseball that you know that that's a fastball with a two-seam grip, versus a four-seamer, which is a fastball with a four-seam grip. And we use the terminology so frequently that sometimes we don't remember that there are actually people out there trying to understand the game and are brand new viewers and or listeners to it. So back when I was doing play-by-play, I made a habit every now and then when a term would come up that you, me, and everybody else here understands because we've heard it a million times, I would sometimes ask for an explanation from my analyst in simple terms, just in case there was someone out there that didn't understand what it meant. And I remember the term can of corn. It's so often used in a baseball broadcast. And there's a story that it was invented 70, 80 years ago to sort of describe how in old shops, someone needed a can of corn that the storekeeper would turn around with his big stick and push it off the top shelf and catch it with two hands. And that's why a lazy fly ball to center field is often called a can of corn. Well, to use that term and assume somebody knows it is wrong. So sometimes you have to slow it right down and remember that you may have many people who are brand new to your broadcast.
Doug, that grandmother in Lethbridge, how do you speak to her?
Yeah, I think Jamie hit on it perfectly. I think it's, yeah, if I'm describing a basketball game or something, if whatever, use a pick and roll as an example, pretty simple, basic basketball term. I'll use the terminology, but I'll also try to describe what the athlete is doing, so that you're kind of trying to navigate both people. The people that know, well, clearly that's a pick and roll, Doug. You don't need to explain it to me. But like you said, the grandma or the grandfather that's watching that doesn't know can see, oh, player comes over, sets the
Pretty
screen,
good.
and then rolls to the rim. So it's balancing both, I think, to try to describe what people are seeing, but also in that moment, you can still use the language that is maybe more commonplace that people understand. So that's what I try to do, is to mix both in as much as I can.
We have a question in the chat box from Theo Jones. How do you get into professional broadcasting, that space? Do you start in radio? Do you start somewhere else? I think Jamie's probably the intended target, but Doug, feel free.
I'll start, Doug, if you don't mind. I
Yeah, please.
believe I believe that this generation, this young generation of aspiring broadcasters, has opportunities that never existed for me. Like I said earlier on, I once went into a Radio Shack. I don't even think Radio Shack exists, and I bought a microphone that you could plug into a tape deck, and you could record your voice. And I used to go and call games just for practice, with no analyst. And now the technology that's available to this generation is so deep that I don't understand it. I don't know what TikTok is. I'm on Instagram. I'm not very good at it. There are so many things this generation can do with their phones. So I would guess that if you've gotten pretty handy with your iPhone and you have sports all around you, start there, man. Go and put yourself a little demo reel together of things that you've just done on your own and play it back as often as you can. Match it up to some of the people that you admire who do it professionally. Learn from the mistakes you make. And maybe one day you'll be able to package that thing off to some radio station or television station and get your first job calling, I don't know, play by play for the Medicine Hat Tigers. Who knows where it begins? But it always begins somewhere. And then you just take the gradual steps as you go. Cherish the times that you have getting a chance to do it. And if you aspire to greater heights, don't stop aspiring to do that. Just be happy with whatever level you end up at ultimately.
Doug, do you want to chime in here?
I'll just add quickly. Yeah, just be interested and ask around for opportunities. And I'm a living example of that. One of my best friends, who actually now he's a professional broadcaster himself, does the Ottawa Red Blacks games. I half joked to him about 25 years ago. He was doing the U of A basketball game. Just said, "Yeah, if you ever need a color guy, let me know." Not thinking it would go anywhere. Next thing I know, a week later, I'm on a bus to Lethbridge doing the games, and for all the poor people, they've been stuck listening to me ever since. So it's you just never know what might come of it. And for me, that sort of led to getting to do all these other things, from Stingers games to the support of some of my international stuff. So ask around, because now so many, especially on the school side, so many places are doing games now. There's opportunities all over the place to jump in, and I mean, a lot of the high schools are doing things now. So it just ask, be present, be curious, and see what opportunities might be out there for you.
Andy,
Yeah.
very quickly,
Yeah.
2 years ago, the public address announcer for the Seattle Kraken, hours before game, lost his voice, and the organization was in a massive panic. The guy just had no voice, and they didn't have a backup on his job. He'd been so reliable in it. And their IT guy came to the management office and said, listen, I've been wanting to do this forever. Let me do it tonight. And they said, the job is yours. And he handled all the public address announcements for the Seattle Kraken's NHL game that night in a sold-out arena. And he took that one effort and used it as an application to become the public address announcer for the incoming PWHL team, who now sell out every home game they play in Seattle. And he is their voice because he took that one chance to ask if he could take that opportunity in place of someone who was sick.
My opportunity in the American Hockey League came about from like a phone call from somebody working at Investors in St. John. I was in Halifax at the time. I had never done play-by-play before, but I had been a broadcaster for a number of years at that time. So did I have the experience? No. Did I have experience? Yes. And literally, I spoke to the general manager of that American Hockey League team on a Tuesday. There was a Wednesday Halifax Mooseheads game. Like my brother, I took an old cassette tape deck and a microphone down to the Mooseheads game that night. I called the game into a tape deck. It was okay, I think. Clearly, it got me the job. But I literally put it on a bus the very next day, and he got it that evening. And 48 hours later, I was on an airplane headed to Norfolk, Virginia to call my first American Hockey League game. So these opportunities, some of them can be cultivated, some of them just arrive. And you need to know when to recognize them and how to capitalize on them. We do have a lot of questions actually starting to come in, so I'm just going to start to roll through them. Gray, who is an NCAA Division II play-by-play broadcaster, he's looking for advice on analysts who might be students who have limited knowledge of a team, a sport, and your broadcast might be limited in terms of the quality of the camera and the graphics and the production. How would you suggest somebody work to overcome some of the I guess logistical challenges that might lie out there?
You cannot go wrong with letting a broadcast breathe as long as you have the sound if it's audio only, or the visuals if it's video only. And in a perfect world, if it's televised somewhere, you have the video and audio together. You may have a level of inexperience on the broadcast. You don't have to be perfect. Offer some passion in your call, let the broadcast breathe, and by the time that sporting event is over, it's probably a nice product. That would be my advice. Doug?
Yeah, for me, I think it's, especially if it's a color person, I think and I had this experience this fall doing football with someone who had never done it before. And just, I mean, they clearly knew the game, and it was just having a bit of a conversation beforehand. And back to what we talked about earlier, it was helping him, just asking him some questions during the broadcast to open him up for opportunities to discuss what was happening. So he didn't, he and I could then be fairly well aligned, and it just opened up opportunities for him to discuss. I think, and he got comfortable really quickly and did a really good job with it. So I think it's just giving people the confidence to know, hey, if you know this sport, leverage that. Like, be confident in the fact that you know the game, and you're not having to invent things that you don't know. I mean, if you've never done the sport, that's a different story. But if it's a sport, lean into that knowledge. And like Jamie said, it's not going to be perfect, and that's okay. I mean, I'm far from that every time I'm doing a game myself. So but that's helped me in that sense, is just asking that person questions as the play-by-play person to help guide them through the call a little bit.
Doug, you might be the perfect guy to answer this, or at least the perfect of this trio. There's a question from Regan Hume about these opportunities that we talk about and the building of connections that you've both talked about. How do you make that not seem transactional? And how do I make it, I'm obviously looking for something, but I don't want it to be a favor. I don't want it to be awkward in any sense. Is it the establishment of that connection and then the seeking of the opportunity, or if there's an open door, do I just go in and be upfront about it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it can really depend a little bit. I think it's, if you're genuinely interested and curious about it, I think it's okay to reach out to people to ask. I had somebody reach out this summer who said, found me somehow and said, "Hey, I'd love to just chat with you to learn a little more. I'd like to get into broadcasting." I'm like, "Great, let's have a chat." So we sat down, had a coffee. He's come in. He's sat in on one of our broadcasts a couple of weeks ago, and has actually now got some opportunities himself over the last couple of weeks. So most people, and I can't speak for everyone, but I think most people will be more than happy to answer some questions or to have a quick conversation to get someone a little bit more information or get them a little more comfortable with how the broadcasting space works. And if people aren't, that's okay too, but don't be afraid to reach out, because again, I think for the most part, people are pretty reasonable and are happy to do that. And that connection might lead somewhere, or it might open up some other opportunities or some other questions that might lead that person somewhere else. So that's what I would say. Just don't be afraid to reach out to people, because there's lots of people that I think are happy to chat about their experience in broadcasting.
And being young and looking for an opportunity is exceedingly frustrating. And I know that there are a lot of people listening to this who are doing play-by-play at some level. They can't seem to figure out where the next step is going to be. In this country, Canada, and I can see by some of the messages coming up that there's several people listening and watching who are in the United States, and I think this applies to both countries. The turnover in low-level to mid-level sports before you can start thinking about going up into the network area is constant, because jobs change constantly. Management of the teams changes. The people doing the play-by-play broadcasts in this particular town or city need to get on with their lives and raise a family. They need to leave for whatever reason. They get a better opportunity. They get bumped from AA to AAA. So if you somehow find a way of keeping apprised of all of the developments within your region, you may see opportunities open up just by paying attention to them. And personally, I was a big fan of, if I see something that I think is going to happen, get in the car, drive to the station, in my case, a TV station, and, call ahead of time and ask to meet with the general manager of that station, or, the executive producer of that show, and say, "Hey, I'm not here for a job. I just want you to know that I'm interested at some point. Here's my name. Here's my phone number. And I'm pretty sure I can do a heck of a job. If something comes up, please reach out."
Okay, Jordy Arthur has in our chat asked about these live productions and mistakes and how we handle them. And if you say the wrong name, if you see 26 and it's actually 28 and you call the wrong name, that's very minor. But how would you suggest that individuals new to the field deal with mistakes? We don't want to belabor them for certain, but is there some advice? Do you just recognize that you made a mistake and move on? Do you go back and correct it? How do you work?
How about both? I listen. We're just human beings that have learned to use technology to broadcast things out to people. We're human and therefore expected to make mistakes. I made tons of them. I remember Aaron Hill's first hit in the major leagues was a double. Sorry, it was a triple, but I missed the flight of the ball and I thought it went over the fence and I called it a home run. And I'm not going to hide from that. It's a national audience. I admitted it right away and apologized. There's Aaron Hill standing at third base. Clearly, it wasn't a home run. I think it's human to fess up immediately to the mistakes you make, and I think, quite frankly, an audience appreciates that.
Yeah, I have nothing to add. I completely agree. I think it's a bit of both. I think you understand in the moment if the error that you've made is worthy of a correction, or if it's something small enough that you can just move on and then make sure that next time you get it right. But I think there are some times where, I mean, as an example, even if you've studied it all week long to make sure you know how to pronounce a name, it'll still in the moment, it'll pop the other way. And those are the kind of things for sure that I make sure that, hey, I made a mistake. I want to correct that, because if the friends or family are watching, I want to make sure that I'm doing them right. But yeah, Jamie's bang on. You're going to make mistakes. It's just going to happen, and understand the moment whether you need to. I mean, you should always own it, but if it's worth bringing up again, I think that depends on the situation and the context.
Yeah, and the only thing that I might add would be that it certainly isn't about you in that moment. You might have made the mistake, but really the story is not you. The story is the game that's unfolding, the event that's in front of us. So acknowledge it and move on, correct it, move on. It really is. You should probably look to make it as simple as possible. What would be the primary focus or point as a broadcaster if you get that last minute call, you're doing play by play, you have 24 hours or less. I've been in these shoes. First pitch, the tip off, the face off is really hours away. You need to be ready for two teams, at least one of which you might not have any knowledge of whatsoever. You don't regularly cover them. What's the focus point that we should be looking at, Doug?
Oh, yeah, I've been in those shoes too. I think I would take a step back and assess the situation and say, okay, what in this matchup, what do I know? What do I understand inherently? So to what you just said, Andy, if I know one team pretty well, the other team I don't know quite as well, in that case, let me spend a little more time learning about this other team so I can at least balance it off a little bit, have some knowledge. And I'm not going to have time to dive really deeply, but what are a handful of key elements that I can learn about this other team that I can bring to the broadcast, that I can talk about, that's going to help again enhance the story of what's happening in that game. Just be realistic about what you can do. You're not going to have every answer to all of your questions, but if you can really look at that whole situation and say, okay, I have a pretty good sense of this team and I kind of know where they're going to be at. What can I learn about the other to make sure that I have a good context of the whole situation? That's where I would go.
I'll give you a slightly different perspective, and this comes from someone who got his on-air start at CBC in Edmonton, the lowest rated of the three TV stations in Edmonton at the time, meaning that when I made mistakes, and I made plenty of them, very few people actually saw them. So I had the benefit of learning in a market that was big, but on a station that wasn't widely viewed. And so when I got through the system and advanced to a certain level and was ultimately hired by what became a major network in Sportsnet, I had to make very conscious decisions of some of the requests that were being made of me. So twice in my career at Sportsnet, I have been asked at the very last minute to fill in for somebody because they were unable to make it. In fact, it was the same person both times, a gentleman by the name of Rob Falls. The first time I got asked was to replace him the next day, and I was asked this at about 11 o'clock at night to do coverage of curling. I think his voice had been lost, or he was very, very ill, and they needed someone last minute to step in and call that afternoon's, I don't know if it was a Grand Slam of curling or whatever it was. And as I'm leaning back in the chair, trying to make a determination as to what my answer is going to be, I realize I don't know curling well enough. This is a network situation. And maybe my attempt to be adjustable to this is not the smartest thing in the world. And I said, look, if you're in a pinch and you just can't find anybody better than I'll do it. But the truth is, I don't understand the sport that well. I don't have the passion for it. So if you can find somebody better, please do. And they did. So that one never came to fruition, and it was probably a good thing. when I was asked to do a Blue Jays game with about 7 hours notice for the first time, I jumped at it because I knew the sport. I love the sport with a passion. And I just figured I'll show up at the ballpark. I'll do as much research as I can in advance. But for the most part, because it's TV, I'm just going to let it breathe. And I was sitting with an analyst by the name of John Cerruti, who was a gem of a human being. And he took me aside and he said, don't worry about this. We'll make it through this. And he said, just lean on me, right? And John knew the game up, down, and sideways. He played in the big leagues for 9 years. And it was actually an easy game to call because the Yankees destroyed the Blue Jays. It was like 10-1 after 3 innings. And it was the first Blue Jays broadcast I ever did. But it was an easy one to call because I just relaxed, didn't force it, didn't try to impress anybody, and let John Cerruti be his best.
Jamie, maybe you can help with this one. Gavin Myers is a sophomore in college in Florida. Just did his first game, a couple of innings of play-by-play, or it looks like baseball on Friday.
Mm-hmm.
There were a couple of times when he was going to start to say something about batting, the player that was batting, but then that player does the exact opposite as to what he was going to speak of. Do I still say it, but later? Also, do you talk about a team that is underperforming and isn't having a good season? So let's just deal with the first part of that. As you have one of those stories ready to come out, and then all of a sudden something changes and maybe that player starts exhibiting something different or opposite to what you want to talk about.
Oh,
Do you make that switch on the fly? Do you?
I'd love detail on what it is he's talking about. It's almost as if he's suggesting that this particular player had a very distinct batting stance, and maybe that player is in a slump and decides to change it that game. So the story becomes somewhat irrelevant, or maybe it doesn't, right? Because you can say, if you've watched this player in the past, you'll notice he swings this way. Today, he's trying something different. I don't believe, I think it's important to recognize if something suddenly becomes irrelevant and not forcing it, especially in a live sporting event, because first swing of his new batting stance could exit the ballpark with the bases loaded, and it's a grand slam, and you don't want to miss that. So I wish I had a little more detail on what he was saying, but I hope that helps.
Okay. Gavin, I hope that. Let's go to the second part of Gavin's question. How do you talk about a team that's underperforming or isn't having a good season? I think here at UNB, we've been really fortunate. Our hockey teams are high achievers. But from time to time, things don't go as planned. But you have to acknowledge that. Doug, University of Alberta hockey teams are in a very similar boat. National championship banners hang in your arenas too. But not every game can be won, and not every season is a tremendous season. How do you acknowledge the downtrends, the underperformance, without sounding negative?
Yeah, I mean, back in the day when I was doing Alberta Golden Bears hockey, there weren't, just like at UNB, there weren't a lot of down years. So it was easier. I'll give you an example even of what we're going to face this weekend. So the Alberta Pandas women's basketball team have had an outstanding season. They've been number 2 in the country pretty much all year. And 4 teams were undefeated in Canada West after Christmas. So Calgary, Regina, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. And they were all going to play each other over a 4-week stretch. So the Pandas lose the 2 to Saskatchewan, really close games, could have gone either way. And then they end up losing 3 of 4 to Calgary and Regina over the next couple of weeks. So they go 1-5 in that stretch. They're a better team than that, but we're going to have to talk about that this weekend a little bit. We're going to have to bring up the fact that it has been a bit of a struggle. This is a team that I think has championship aspirations and frankly is good enough to have those aspirations. But our point isn't to beat them down. We're not going to do that, but we're going to talk about maybe what has led to this, what has caused this, what are some of the trends we're seeing that have gone. So you can tell the story, but what's led to where you're at without pounding the team over the head about how they failed and they've struggled. Like, so you can kind of do both a little bit. In years, and again, we've been fortunate here, knock on wood, where we haven't had a lot of years on the basketball side, more on the football side, where it's been a struggle at times a lot over the last many years. And Connor's laughing because we both know it's been challenging. And there have been seasons, 0-8 seasons, where, the season's over in the first quarter of the first game. and you've got games left to go. And what you're doing then, in my mind, is you're talking about the individual players. You're talking about the growth in them. You're talking about the potential of where they can go and what they've done and what growth we've seen over the course of the year. So that's when I dive into the individual stories maybe a little bit more, when the team dynamic is clearly everyone can read this team is 0-7 heading into their final game of the year. I don't have to tell that story. It's pretty obvious. But if you can start to talk about some of the individual stuff, again, it paints a bit of a different picture, while not, again, hitting everyone over the head with the idea that, okay, this team's clearly struggling. So there are a couple examples of how I might approach it depending on the situation and the overall context. Again, Pandas basketball is still a good team. They could go on a run here late, get themselves into the final eight, and have a good tournament. That's not out of the realm of possibility. But we still need to address the fact that the last month it's been a struggle. So you can find ways to I think accomplish both.
I'm a firm believer in respectable criticism. But my goodness, let's be critical honestly and willfully when it's called for. I mean, it's just sports, right?
Yeah.
This is just sports. People are going to win. People are going to lose. People are going to overperform and underperform, as long as it's done respectfully. I don't believe in taking personal shots at anybody. I just don't. I've been with broadcasters who've done it. It's cheap and unnecessary to me. Sometimes people want to, I don't know, generate clicks, to use a modern term, by saying something about somebody that really is quite unfair. That said, it's sports. Anybody in this line of work should be critical and do it easily, because you're going to win and you're going to lose. And when you're losing, you have to be honest with why it's happening. For me and my broadcast partners to sit up while the Blue Jays have lost, I don't know, 17 in a row and try and make it seem like it's all rosy would be an absolute insult to the audience.
We've got about 10 minutes left. So if you do have a question, get it into our chat now. Jamie, I can offer you some insight from Gavin in Florida. He was going to talk about how the team he was working with and broadcasting for wasn't chasing pitches, and then a player swings at a ball in the dirt. So,
okay. He was a disciplined hitter and then became undisciplined. Interesting.
With that, another question pops into the chat. As a broadcast journalism student, I often cover general news stories I'm not too deeply passionate about. I know this, haven't we all? Just you're not, that's a big club there, Dante. I know this might be part of my path toward becoming a sports broadcaster, and I already work as a play-by-play commentator for my school's varsity sports. Is covering these broader stories simply part of the process?
Dante, yes, it is for now. Please be patient. You may find yourself ascending to a level where you can focus only on the sport that you're passionate about, or on the multitude of sports you're passionate about. I was in a situation where, due to cutbacks at the CBC, for 2 years, I'd been the weekend late night sports anchor in Edmonton. There were cutbacks, and suddenly I was also handed newsreader and weather guy. So in essence, instead of just coming in for the last 15 minutes of a half an hour broadcast to do sports, I had to do it all. And to be perfectly honest with you, I was not happy about it. And I think it was 1994. I think the World Cup of Soccer had just ended. And if I remember correctly, a player from Colombia had missed a penalty kick. And 3 weeks after he got home, he was assassinated for missing that penalty kick. And it was in a city in Colombia called Medellin. That's the proper pronunciation of Medellin. I didn't know the pronunciation of Medellin at the time, and it was our lead story that night. And I called that place Medellin. And part of me thinks I did it on purpose, so I would be viewed as a lousy news option. And I butchered a couple of other things, maybe slightly intentionally, because I was just really unhappy with the fact that they were making me do something that I just had no passion for, and that no passion was to do news. And luckily, about 4 weeks later, they hired a fill-in news guy, and I got back to doing just sports. I wouldn't recommend sabotaging an opportunity. I came close, but that was, goodness, 30 plus years ago. So I think I'm safely separated from it.
And I think in today's shrinking mainstream media field, you have to be prepared to do just about anything. So Dante, yes, all those, I'll say lame assignments that come your way, and trust me, I've
Mm-hmm.
had my share. Not in the last 10 years, fortunately, because I assign myself to whatever I want here. But in the past, I've gone from literally covering the Stanley Cup final one week to having to do news and current affairs the next week at CBC Sports in Windsor, Ontario. It moves like that, and the opportunities that you have to hone your craft as a storyteller, whether it's Game 7 of a Stanley Cup final or Aunt Susie's bake sale down at the Kiwanis Lodge. Their stories, their human interactions, they're very different in scope, but what lies at the heart of both of those things are people doing something for a specific reason. And as long as you can write that or talk about that or report that, you're improving for the next opportunity that you get. So, um, just go through the questions here. From Theo Jones, I've been doing broadcasting for esports for about 3 years now. How do you think that that can translate into more in-person sports? And I don't mind taking the lead on this one, guys, because
What's esports?
es
Sorry.
it's electronic sports. I don't know that I can speak to it. It's not
Ga-
something that we have here,
gaming?
gaming,
Yeah.
but I think it goes back to what we were just talking about in that every opportunity that you have to have a microphone in front of you to speak,
Mhm.
whether it's an esport event or a high school hockey game or a Canada West football game or the bake sale that I just talked about.
Mhm.
Every opportunity is a chance to improve writing, delivery, um, choice of questions in an interview. Opportunities exist everywhere.
Mhm.
So, yes, can it translate? You're the one that's going to have to make that translation. You can take your experience in esports and present it to somebody who might be looking for a football announcer or a basketball announcer or a volleyball announcer and go from there. Do you think major networks will ever move away from remote broadcasting? There seems to be a trend more and more towards that. I think what the Desmond is asking here is guys who sit in front of a screen, not at the event, and call the play-by-play, provide the color commentary.
Not in my lifetime. I know it's happening in radio. It's happening in the very city I work with the very team that I work with, the Toronto Blue Jays, who have a radio play-by-play crew that, for the most part, does not travel with the team. They do home games on site, but not road games. It is a trend in radio to save money. There's no other reason to do it but to save money. Do I understand it? Not necessarily, given how much money is being spent on television rights by some of these networks. But it is what it is. So I don't see in major professional televised sports a point where they trim so much that the announcing crew doesn't end up going on site.
We've got about 5 minutes left. I'm going to ask a question for Grayson Knutson. I know this webinar has been aimed at people breaking in, but as folks who've done this for a while, what advice did you have for someone who's done 150-ish games a year in a variety of sports to continue to improve when it feels like there isn't much more room for improvement?
Ooh, if you feel that way, you're in a pretty good position, right? If your audience is reacting to you in that regard, that they're enjoying what you're doing, maybe improvement isn't your primary focus at this point. Personally, I would say continue to watch your broadcasts or listen to them and be your own harshest critic. And if you really want somebody else's input, find somebody who has achieved a level that you respect and ask them to do it for you. But otherwise, if you think you're doing things quite well, respect that you might be doing them quite well and be proud of that.
Doug?
And I'll jump in because I know Grayson and I know he's a good broadcaster. So, I would agree that there probably isn't a lot of level for improvement, Grayson. But I guess it's just like for me, like I know there's a million things I can do better every time I come home. I drive home after games and I'm already thinking about the things that, hey, I did this fine, but what can I work on to be better and different next time? And I know for me, like even just this year, the last few weeks, it's been around my preparation. Like, are there additional levels of depth I can get to on the preparation side so that I have some different angles to come at? I can tell the story a little bit differently or a little more uniquely or a little more in depth when the time calls for it. So I know the on-air stuff I can always work at, but even just some of the other things on the side, that's what I can speak for myself trying to improve at. So I think there's always things we can find to work on. I think it's just sort of picking those and diving into them and seeing how either the people react or how you react to some of those changes that you've made that to make it because that kind of makes it fun too when you're sort of challenging yourself as you do more and more games. So that would be what I'd throw out there.
Connor, do we have the ability to go past the bottom of the clock here?
My Zoom goes until 3 my time, so I guess 6 your time. So we got some more
I,
time.
I, I certainly don't want to take more of Doug and Jamie's time than necessary, but there are just I think we'll get to the questions that exist and then we'll finish off. There was a question from Wilson Wong. What's the weirdest sporting event you've ever broadcast live? I think maybe I'll start with Jamie. I can't see it being a Blue Jays game.
No, it wasn't a Blue Jays game. It's not weird, but I did 2 years of arena football, which is football with a whole lot of flair. That wasn't weird. None of the Olympic events I have done I consider weird, so I think I'll have to pass on a firm answer.
Doug, have you got something in that category?
Well, I'll throw. I did a sport called bandy, which again isn't necessarily weird, but it's not that common over here. Basically, think of hockey on a soccer field. Think of it that way. So it's 11 on 11 on a giant sheet of ice. I did it in Siberia at the World University Games. I'd never seen a bandy game live until I was calling it for the first time live. And so I had to spend a lot of time learning the terminology, learning how the game worked. It's kind of a combination, like I said, of a bit of soccer, a bit of ice hockey, a bit of field hockey. So a mix of all that. I've done highlights of bridge and chess. Again, not weird, but impossible to describe because they're literally people are sitting there and you're trying to describe what they're doing by, oh, they moved their pawn. That was really hard. And it was about a 3-minute clip. And I struggled to get through 3 minutes of trying to describe it. So, yeah, nothing overly weird, just some things that are maybe a little less common in North America. But bandy was fun. It's a crazy game. It was a lot of fun.
And Wilson, it wasn't live, but I went from working in Windsor, Ontario with CBC Sports there, getting to cover the Detroit Red Wings through some Stanley Cup runs, to CBC television in Halifax, where one of my first assignments was to go out and cover giant pumpkin races. They hollow out these 700 pound pumpkins and they float them in the water in a little community outside of Halifax. And huge event. I'll say weird, but for anybody participating, there was passion involved, there was fun involved, there was a winners and losers involved. So would it be considered mainstream sports? I don't know. But certainly I left with a way better feeling of things than when I arrived. I thought, oh God, how am I going to do this? But anyway, certainly not live by any means. My colleague Krista McKenna at St. FX University in Antigonish, Nova Scotia. Any advice on recruiting more women commentators for women's sports? Doug.
That's a good question, and I may not be I don't know. I've been really lucky. I mean, I've worked with Kira Lyons. She doing FIBA Olympic qualifying with her. She was on our calls with the women's final eight in basketball here. She played at the University of Saskatchewan. She's the head coach of the Nadukes in the college system here in Alberta. She's just an awesome person, really, really great commentator as well. So, and I can't speak to her story in terms of how she got brought in. Connor might have a better perspective on that because, I mean, she has been doing games for a while. But I think the advice, and again, it would be similar to what we talked about before. I think it's encouraging people to ask questions, to be involved in and around the broadcast, to get comfortable with it. So I don't know that that's different male female necessarily, but I do know that historically, obviously, it has been a more male dominated industry. Although we're seeing a lot of people, Daniela Ponticelli, who I've done some Canada West football with, she's going to be at the Olympics calling hockey. So I mean, she's done really well for herself. So I think as we see more and more women doing it and doing such an awesome job, I'm hopeful that will encourage more women to be involved in calling women's sports or men's sports or both. And so I'm not sure that's advice necessarily, but I think it's similar to what we talked about before. For people that are interested, just find ways to grow that passion and to throw yourself at opportunities that come your way.
I do about 80 Blue Jay home games a year. And based on where our set is situated, I see our customers. The customers are right behind our cameras. Then they walk past all game every day. And in time, soon after Jose Bautista bat flipped and beat the Texas Rangers, I started noticing way more young women walking past or stopping to watch the broadcast than young men, to the point where it became generally, in my estimation, a 50-50 split of who was attending these Blue Jays games. And as such, some years ago, we had a meeting at Sportsnet where I was very vocal about the fact that I saw an imbalance in our broadcast, in essence, too many men. And we went out and actively pursued and auditioned several female analysts to join Blue Jay Central. And luckily, 3 years ago, hired a young lady by the name of Madison Shipman, who was an All-American at Tennessee and an outstanding baseball player. And what she's done in 3 years is changed the environment around our set, where now, instead of young men coming by to say hi to me or Joe Siddle or Caleb Joseph and talk baseball, we have young girls who want to play high level baseball stopping just to see her, just to get her attention, just to talk to her. And I told her when the World Series was over this year, as we were all packing up to go home, I said, I can't tell you how proud I am that you have instituted this interest just by your presence. And so I think there's a great future. It'll be gradual, but especially with the advent of the PWHL, there's a new professional women's baseball league starting up this summer. I think the opportunities are just going to increase. And quite frankly, it's about time.
Yeah, all here at the University of New Brunswick, all of our, we'll call them webcasters, our play-by-play and our color announcers, except for one, are men. It's been my goal as communications manager here to try and put a woman calling play-by-play for women's hockey or women's basketball. That's not so easy because those candidates don't always present themselves. But I think with the surge of interest in things like the PWHL, the WNBA, more women are going to be playing sports. That means more women will become way more versed in sport, and hopefully more women will be nudged into becoming a Sarah Nurse or a Jennifer Botterill who can speak to sport, call the sport. That I would love to be able to have a woman calling our hockey games when our women's teams are on the ice, much like Krista at St. FX. Last question I'm going to put out there just because it's the last one in the chat. Evan is the announcer for College of the Rockies Avalanche Volleyball in Cranbrook, BC.
Hmm?
Wondering, since it's seniors night, should I talk to the seniors before the game if they have a couple of words of motivation for the future generation of volleyball players to announce for them? I see Jamie shaking his head right away.
Yes.
I'm a big yes on this one, Evan, and I'll let Jamie tell you why.
I don't need to expand on it. Yes, yes, and yes. If the I'm assuming the seniors are playing, their word inflected in your broadcast is just going to add, great intrigue and great interest to the broadcast itself. So, like I said earlier in this seminar, the word of other people is often so much more impactful than research done on a laptop. So, yeah, I would highly encourage implementing that plan.
You guys have been super with experience, advice. I'm not going to ask you to leave one kind of golden nugget for everybody as we leave. What, Jamie, should be the takeaway for somebody from this session? If there's one takeaway from it, I think you probably were just hitting on it, but what would you think that might be?
Well, if you don't mind, I'm not going to get too deep into the process itself. What I would advise, given the uncertainty of the role and in addition to that, the industry itself. This is such a competitive industry. It's far more competitive than when I was trying to break into it in the mid 80s. And there are lots of young people who want to do the kind of things that we've been talking about today. So the best that I can say is just be sure you're paying close attention to your heart. Do you do this because you're passionate about it? Is it something you want to do because it's something that you love to do? And if that's the case, just keep going. But pay strict attention to your happiness as you go, because along the way, the road's going to get bumpy. There'll be lots of rejection and in some cases, lots of refusal. And you may not ascend to the level that you're expecting yourself to get to. I don't want you to be disappointed. It's a hard road. Just make sure that you are firmly aware of the passion and the desire that you have. And if you have loads of it, have a great journey.
Doug, you've had a multifaceted career in the sports industry. You have your own company along with doing your work in the CEBL and Canada West. What are you hoping some of your Canada West color analyst and play-by-play contemporaries take away from something like this?
Yeah, I mean, I every day I'm fortunate to be able to have done the broadcasting that I've done. I mean, if you told me 25 years ago that I would have done one game in my life, I would have been probably pretty shocked and pretty excited. So the fact I've been able to do this for in different aspects for 25 years, I've been pretty fortunate. I mean, I learned a long time ago I was never going to be a good enough athlete to be involved at the high level in the sports world. So to get to do it on the business side and the broadcast side, I've been pretty lucky. But I think just to echo what had been spoken about a little bit earlier. It's just be curious, talk to people, ask questions, try to see what is out there. I mean, Jamie said it's extremely competitive. I know I've seen that through friends of mine who are full time into this space. It's very competitive, but there are opportunities to do it as a bit of a second career like me as well, because as much as the industry has gotten more competitive and we've seen downsizing all over the place, that's come along at the same time as we've seen the growth in live streaming and the fact that, I mean, when I was first doing U of A games, we did it on basically dial-up modems that, and not every school did it. Now it's mandated. Everyone's doing it. And that's at the college level. That's at the university level. And again, a lot of the high schools are doing live streaming. I mean, some of my nephew's hockey tournaments are being live streamed, maybe not with a broadcaster necessarily, but just goes to show how much it's changed in terms of the ability for broadcasts to be out there. And with that, provides some opportunity. You might not get paid at all, you might not get paid much, but I mean, Jamie said this a lot, and I'll echo that too, that it's about passion. If you're interested in doing it, there are opportunities there to find. Be curious about them, be intrigued about them, and just moment by moment enjoy the fact that you're doing it and just keep working at it. And again, you never know where that might lead for you.
Yeah, and I'll just say, I've spent a decade here at UNB. I'm really fortunate to have the job that I have. But I've been on the end of a phone call that said, "Hey, we're making some changes," and that job no longer exists more than once. So, there are ups and there are downs. Um, Doug, Jamie, thank you so much for uh, your time, your experience, the stories you've told us. It's been incredible. I've learned a ton. I hope that the people on both sides of the border that have been participating in this have something to take away, not just for themselves, but maybe to share with some of their live stream broadcast colleagues. And we hope that it makes for better broadcasts all around. I want to say thank you as well to everybody that's signed on. Some of them have had to jump off just because of other commitments, whatnot. Whether you've just listened, whether you've asked a question, thank you. Thank you to the members of the College Sports Communicators Canadian Cabinet, and in particular, our President Connor Hood at the University of Alberta. We encourage everyone to visit the website, collegesportscommunicators.com. There's more information there on future webinars. There's information there on available resources that can assist you, and there's membership news there as well. So, Connor, thanks for being part of this and organizing. Doug and Jamie, really enjoyed this. I'd like to think that sometime down the road we could get together and do something like this again. So, on behalf of College Sports Communicators and particularly the Canadian Cabinet, good night from Fredericton.